Hopefully we all know the story of the two fish, who are greeted by an older fish who is swimming past them the other way, and he greets them and politely remarks that the water's a bit cold today. As he passes by, the two fish swim on, and then turn to each other with a puzzled look, as one asks the other, "What is water?" And this simple story helps us to frame the problem with paradigms. Despite the fact that paradigms are everywhere and they play a huge role in shaping the way we think, the way we see, the values we hold, the societies we build, it's remarkable how we fail to spot them, or just as our young fish in our story, even believe that they exist. And why is this? Well, the challenge of course is that we think through paradigms, and we integrate their thinking into everything that we do. So trying to spot them becomes almost impossible, because just like our fish in our story, they reshape the world around us, and we swim within the paradigms that we hold, while at the same time we can't quite see them. In fact, we get trapped in their logic, thinking that the logic they present is the only way to think. We call this the paradigm trap, and escaping from this trap will take time and patience to unpick the lock that keeps us imprisoned. So why are we talking about paradigms here? What is the relevance of paradigms for charities or social movements or the third sector? In fact, anyone who's working towards positive change in our world? Well, the answer to that question is simple. We are currently trapped in a rather toxic paradigm, one that not only is causing immense harm to our world, both environmentally as well as socially, but also creates a whole range of problems for charities when it comes to motivating and engaging audiences into real and meaningful change. This is a marketing paradigm, which is a way of thinking that shapes how we relate and engage with our audiences on positive causes. It is one of the most toxic paradigms there is, as it is highly effective in keeping us trapped in our lower values, and makes positive change on the issues that we care about almost impossible. And as we will see, the marketing paradigm is a psychological pollutant, and it is these polluting byproducts of this paradigm that cause so much harm to our world. So with charities, social movements and individuals who are all looking to bring about positive change in our world, whatever the cause, whether it is humanitarian or environmental, we must be prepared to ask some fundamental questions such as, can we escape from the marketing paradigm trap? Can we see this paradigm for what it is, and see how its all-embracing logic is undermining our hard work to bring about positive change in the world? Can we move to a different paradigm, which holds a different philosophy, approach, and range of techniques that are more aligned with how our brains have evolved? Can we use this new paradigm to address some of the most stubborn issues we all face in terms of audience engagement and motivation? Before we jump into the marketing paradigm and find out why we should escape from its ironclad logic, let's ask some foundational questions. First of all, do we want to? Do we really want to leave marketing behind? Surely marketing is something that we need to get better at, not to abandon altogether. Anyway, is it even possible to leave marketing behind? It forms the backbone of everything that we do. Are we not chasing an unrealistic expectation? So to clarify, remember we are talking about paradigms. Paradigms represent ways of thinking, and it is these ways of thinking that shapes how we engage our audiences into action. We're not talking about abandoning all forms of marketing engagement. We're instead talking about our thinking and the underlying philosophy that shapes how we engage our audiences on the causes we really care about. And the reason why we are considering a change in paradigms is that across the sector, whether you're working on climate-related issues or social inequality, poverty, or any other cause, is that we all, at some point or another, are confronted with some difficult questions which we all struggle to grapple with, such as the fact that we know that people care about our causes that we seek to address, so why is it so hard to motivate them into real action on the things that they say that they already care about? How do we overcome polarisation? How do we overcome that growing gap between different points of views and the argumentative style of engagement that we so frequently encounter? Especially with a growing number of detractors who make our work so difficult. How do we engage and motivate cold and indifferent audiences, those who have switched off completely with our normal messages and engagement approaches? How do we engage younger audiences who, for some strange reason, don't always respond positively to our campaigns and initiatives, despite the fact that they will claim they really care about the causes we champion? How do we grow our organisations, our movements, our impact, our supporter base against an increasingly challenging backdrop? How do we create long-term behaviour change that we need to build if we want to create the necessary political will for change? And how do we create powerful movements for change that don't fall into the polarisation trap? These are not small questions, they are all big questions which I'm sure that you have all struggled or encountered at some point or another. The reason why the answer to these difficult questions eludes us is that we are trying to solve them with the wrong mindset. It is not that we need to think harder or do more audience research, or as if the answer is somehow in the detail, but rather we need to think differently if we are to address these almost universal issues. This demands a new paradigm, which is a new way of thinking that helps us to address these stubborn questions. If we are serious about bringing about real and meaningful change on the causes that we care about, then we definitely need to pay a lot more attention to a major shift that has happened and continues to take place across the wider charity sector, as well as the third sector and most social movements that we see today. It's a very worrying trend which has huge implications for the effectiveness of our collective work and our ability to bring about real change on the causes that we champion. So what is this trend and why aren't we noticing it? Well, this trend is a move further and further towards what we call the marketing paradigm, which is a way of thinking that shapes all of our work, communications, actions, fundraisings, campaigning, you name it. All of this work is shaped by the values and logic of marketing theory. Because it is a paradigm, we fail to see it. As we've already covered, we think through paradigms and we order our world around the paradigms we hold. This means that they not only become integrated into our common consciousness, but they become integrated into our actions, our philosophy, our anthropologies, our sense of self and who we are. In other words, paradigms have the power to go deep into the psyche, making them almost impossible to spot. The problem is that paradigms are not values neutral. They all lean towards certain values. And in this case of the marketing paradigm, it is a very powerful paradigm that keeps us trapped in our lower values, making real change on the issues we care about almost impossible. So what happens when charities, social movements and all organisations seeking to bring about positive change in our world adopt this paradigm within their work? Well, the answer to that is simple, and we are seeing this played out in real time today, especially in large social movements such as the climate movement. The clear trend shows that no matter how loud we shout about our causes or how much energy we pour into our campaigns and initiatives, there's clearly something not resonating with our audiences. We might be able to create short-term engagements, big moments, but when it comes to building lasting change or reaching out and engaging cold audiences, overcoming polarisation, working with younger audiences, creating long-term behaviour change, we are becoming less effective. These are the areas where we really need to succeed in, yet these are the areas we really struggle with. We might be good at raising funds, but not building communities of change. Or to put it in more bluntly, we are becoming less effective in creating the necessary changes on the issues that we passionately care about. Whatever your cause, whether it is environmental or humanitarian or any other cause, this trend is pretty much universal. These trends are all representative of a meta trend. The result of all this is that we should be willing to address some big questions around audience motivation and engagement. We need to start to address the dominant paradigms that shape our work and see whether these almost universally accepted paradigms can actually take us to where we need to go. Because if our paradigms are at fault, then it affects everything that we do. So it doesn't matter how hard we push, how much energy we put into our work, how many resources we throw at our campaigns, if we are working with the wrong paradigm, we will always face the motivation gap. The gap between what audience say and believe and what they do. This is a dreaded thin yes, where people say they believe in your cause, but fail to show up, sign up, or donate. What they lack is not belief, but rather motivation. The result is a growing sense of apathy and indifference to the campaigns and initiatives we deliver, despite the fact when we ask audience if they care about our cause, they say they do. So what is going on here? Or more importantly, what is going wrong and how do we fix it? Well, the answer to this lies not with the conscious mind, but the unconscious mind, the mind that deals with the implicit meaning of the stories we tell. In other words, where we're going wrong is at the metanarrative level. Just to explain this point, let's look at climate change and the climate emergency as a perfect example. If we look at the global climate movement today, we can see that this movement is unlike anything we have seen in the history of campaigning. Made up of millions of people worldwide, we can see that this movement, in terms of output, has been incredible. The amount of energy that's come out of this movement, the mobilization and direct action that's happened. Also, the amount of research gone into the minutiae of detail, as well as informing general public around the real and serious threat of climate change. Also, we've seen a growth in psychological approaches, including nudge theories, to help drive positive change. And also we've seen storytelling from different parts of the world, telling of stories of communities who are affected by climate change. So why hasn't it been a runaway success? Well, when we look at the movement through the eyes of a storyteller, it seems strange that we keep telling the same story again and again, expecting change to happen. And this is not just climate activists, but also scientists, campaigners, leaders, and a whole range of different actors. This meta-narrative is based on the information deficit model, the idea that what we are lacking is information. Because if we know what climate change is, what threat it poses, and what to do, then we will act accordingly. If we raise awareness of climate change, if we have the right information, then we will act. But this is clearly not the case. We are not computers, nor automatons that receive information and act accordingly. This approach is more aligned with a Homo economicus anthropology, that we make decisions based on rational thinking. If this were the case, then we would have cracked the climate emergency by now. It is not a lack of information that is the problem, which we have to admit that the climate movement has excelled in communicating its cause. What we're lacking is motivation. What is interesting is that we are good at changing the novelty, but not the meta-narrative. It might be a different stunt, a different message, a different story taken from a different country around the world, but what is interesting is that the meta-narrative remains the same, that we really need to take action on the climate emergency. So what should we do next? Tell the same story but now with even more urgency? Perhaps we can apply some more red lines that we can't cross, or state some ultimatums. No matter how hard we push the same story, how much energy we pour into it, that if the story is wrong, then we're unlikely to inspire real change. So why do we think that telling the same story again and again will make any difference? Who decided on this strategy? Or have we just fallen into this way of thinking? So this begs another question. Why do we keep telling the same story? Or rather using the same meta-narrative? And what is stopping us from changing it? And this is where we get into some deep issues here, because to understand this problem, we begin to unpick some of the deep-held beliefs and thinking traps that keep us stuck in a loop, telling the same story again and again, which comes down to a simple observation. Our meta-narrative is not in the right shape, which creates long-term behavioural change, but rather it is shaped by the dominant paradigm we hold, or rather the Marxian paradigm. Because it is a paradigm, it shapes everything that we do, it shapes how we think people think, it shapes the values of our audience engagement, it even distorts the shapes of stories that we tell. As way of an example, if we look at the shape of most stories told across the climate movement, and by the way, this analysis can be applied to any charity or organisation working for a cause, is that we see these dominant story shapes. They both have a distinctive U-bend. The first is The Man in the Hole. This is your action hero thriller storyline, where we start off with the positive, life is good, but then something happens. The bad guy invades our hero's home and kills his dog or his wife, or something unjust happens to him. He then goes on a journey to restore balance, usually loaded with a plethora of guns and martial arts skills, and seeks revenge. The ending is where order is restored, or he has got his revenge, or justice, depending on how you look at it. And then we have the story shape of Boy Meets Girl, our rom-com, easy-watching storyline. We have our two star-crossed lovers who meet up and fall in love, and everything goes up. Only to find out that, oh well, something goes wrong, there's a miscommunication, there's a falling out, and everything goes back down. But then, right at the end, they meet at the airport and embrace and declare their love for each other, and everything goes back up. These two storylines are the shape of hero action thrillers and rom-com style storylines, which are also the story shapes from the two genres that may entertain us very briefly, but do very little in terms of inner transformation. We don't come away from an action hero or rom-com as transformed people. They are on the easy watching side of the spectrum of all stories. So when we look at the story shapes in our communications, campaigns and initiatives across the sector, why do we find these same story shapes? Where we start off with the positive. This is Abdul, he's a farmer who lives in Niger, but due to climate change he can no longer grow his crops, and down we go. But with your support we can help him and his community, and back up. This is classic marketing formula. Create the need and offer the magical solution. Or we have the story shape where we try to be more positive. Usually with people coming together, we believe in change, things are happening, we're making a difference, and up we go. But there's still so much to do, back down we go. So join us to make a difference, and back up we go. The same narrative shape of Boy Meets Girl. For marketing to work, you have to create a need. That's your motivational trigger. Without a need, there is no motivation. And that need is usually framed by creating some sense of inadequacy or anxiety, a sense that there is something wrong with the world. But the magic solution is, if you sign up to our campaign, donate or take action, whatever they ask, we can bring about restoration. We are so used to these formulaic messages found in general marketing approaches is that we wouldn't think in any other way. Why would we? If it works, why not use this approach to engage our audiences? Despite the fact that both storylines rely on a feeling of inadequacy, even with the positive storytelling found in the boy meets girl narrative shape. To drive motivation, you still need to create a need. If we don't create anxiety, we don't create the motivational drive. It's that simple. But every time we create anxiety, whether the audience signs up or not, that anxiety remains. If we imagine the marketing paradigm as an engine which drives everything that we do, just like a fossil-fueled engine, it is a pollutant. Except in this case, it is a psychological pollutant. In other words, if you create anxiety to drive motivation to sign up to your campaign, whether your audience signs up or not, the anxiety remains. So if we tell our audiences that the world has fallen apart or the planet is on fire and signing up to our campaign is a magic solution, regardless of their engagement, that anxiety remains as a psychological pollutant. And we cannot underestimate or glibly overlook the real-world effect anxiety has on the mental health of our audiences, nor on the impact this approach has on long-term motivation. When we imagine the marketing paradigm as a fossil-fueled engine, we see that it works best when it creates anxiety, fear, or any other negative tension in order to create its drive. In the marketing paradigm, it is important to play to your audience's lower values in order to create the necessary response. That's the nature of this paradigm. Playing to higher values with this engine doesn't really work. So it is important that you create fear, create anxiety, and the motivation to engage will surely follow. Because if you use positive messages, then the motivation dissipates. It doesn't really work as well, and we know this from experience. If we don't use the shock tactics, urgent messages, or create anxiety, we are unlikely to have the same impact, the same motivational drive. Despite the fact that this creates a poor long-term strategy. It might work for immediate outcomes, to come to an event, to sign up to a campaign, but does very little to create positive long-term behavioural change. The same engine that has driven so many marketing messages promoting consumer values and materialistic values, the very values most of us are working to overcome, is the same engine that we use to drive audiences' engagement to our cause. This makes no real sense whatsoever. Why would we use a psychologically polluting engine to try to bring about positive change in our world? It's like using a fossil-fueled engine to drive a carbon capture plant. It is logically inconsistent. And just to drive this point home, think about the fact that we are surrounded by marketing messages, all offering us promises of how our life can be improved, that we can buy happiness, our life can be easier, we can be more secure, people will respect us more if we buy this certain product, or that our lives will just be better somehow. These messages make up the background noise of our everyday lives, and they can be broken down roughly into the following. Greed. You are not in possession of the thing that will make you happy. There is a better, smarter, flashier version of the things you already have. Or fear. You are not safe. You will miss out. You'll be gone before you know it. And ego. You're not attractive enough to be lovable. You will not be accepted or respected by others unless you're wearing the latest fashion items. These messages that are designed to drive a sense of inadequacy in order to drive sales is often overlooked as one of the most toxic psychological pollutants that surrounds us every day. When we consider the scale and reach of the marketing messages and how intrusive they are, we cannot underplay the impact that these seemingly innocuous messages have on the deep psyche. So when we look at most campaign and climate messages, using climate change as our example, we can see that most messages follow the same classic pattern of marketing. Instead of creating anxiety, we create eco-anxiety. We play to fear. We use guilt to show that we are not doing enough. There is a feeling of inadequacy that only by signing up to our campaign, taking action or donating is the magic solution. Only then will we take away your anxiety. Even if you do sign up, donate or give, the anxiety remains, creating a long-term psychological pollutant. So why are we using the same engine that arguably created the psychological conditions that have caused climate change in the first place? And as the same engine to drive campaigns, initiatives and audience engagement strategies, there's clearly something wrong here. Something doesn't quite add up. Marketing is designed for profit, not about creating positive behaviour change. In fact, it does the opposite. It prefers to keep audiences passive, immature, reliant on the magic solution that is on offer, so that they will keep coming back again and again. It is not only a psychological pollutant, but it is also a dependency engine. In fact, it works best when it extrinsically motivates audiences. So let's take a quick look at motivation theory and see what happens when we map our messages to a motivation map. When we look at the motivation continuum, this is based on something called self-determination theory. This is an expansion of the self-determination theory model, which only has 5 stages. On our model, we have 8. On the left, we have external regulation. This is extrinsic motivation, and you can see the arrow at the bottom. This arrow represents external regulation. The only reason why we do something is out of reward or punishment. So there's no internal or self-regulation motivation at this point. And when we move over to stage 8, we can see intrinsic motivation, and a big arrow at the top and no arrow below. This is when we are totally self-regulated. This is when we absolutely believe in our cause and nothing's going to change it. We're not driven by our ego or any external factors, we're driven from the heart. Then we look at stage 2, this is introjected regulation, and this is where we do something to avoid shame or play to our ego. And stage 3 is identified regulation, where we do something because we think is important. It's what we ought to do, should do, very important. And then stage 4, we have integrated regulation. We do something when it aligns with our goals and values. And then we have this important line here, which is called the threshold. And this threshold is very important in storytelling, and crossing this threshold is important in terms of trying to awaken your audience to their higher values. And on this side of the threshold is where we should be working on stages 5 to 8. This is where our motivational triggers should be. Because if we want to awaken the right values, we should be working with intrinsic motivation. So when we look at all the climate messages that have taken place over the last 2 years, we map them on this continuum. And these are the results. What is quite clear, there's a clear trend towards the left side of the motivational continuum. This is problematic for so many reasons. Extrinsic motivation is short-term. It actually undermines long-term behavioral change. Extrinsic motivation is something that we do because we ought to, we should do, but we don't really want to do it. And that's why over time this motivation dissipates. It's the reason why we fail to go to the gym despite spending lots of money on gym membership. We want the outcome, but we don't really enjoy the actual thing itself. The result of this is significant and has huge implications for our ability to create powerful movements for change, and also how to overcome polarisation, for there's a clear correlation between extrinsic motivation and polarised audiences. Also has huge impacts on how to create real political change and how to work with long-term behavioural change, and so many other issues. So why aren't we on the right side of the motivation continuum? And surprisingly, when I speak to different charities and experts in the field, they all think that they are on the right side of the motivation continuum. They see that their positive messages, their ability to tell stories, their positive statements of intent, that all these take them to the right side of the motivation continuum. But this simply isn't the case. In our research, we can see that even when organisations and movements try to do positive engagement, they are still doing this from the left side of the motivation continuum. They are still doing marketing. Think about it. Most marketing messages are positive. Most marketing messages, which are all designed for profit, play to our fears, ego, and creates anxiety, all feel pretty positive. They feel as if they are playing to our higher values, our aspirations, our hopes. But when we look under the bonnet, we can still see the same polluting engine chugging away. So we have a huge problem here, that not only are we stuck on the wrong side of the motivational continuum, not only are we trapped within the logic of the marketing paradigm, where we use anxiety to drive motivation, not only do we keep telling the same story again and again, expecting everything to change, but we also don't think we are doing anything wrong. That the problem for low motivation is out there. It's to do with something else, something external, something outside of our control. But this simply isn't the case. But this turns out to be good news, in fact, because if the problems for low audience motivation is external, then there's not much we can do about it. But if low motivation towards our cause can be resolved from within our organisations and our movements for positive change, then this provides us with the power and the agency to make the changes. So why are pretty much all of our messages on the left-hand side of the motivational continuum? Well, the answer to that question is complex and will take a long time to unpack, as the problem also goes quite deep. But in summary, it is the half-drawn horse, which is a famous meme. That shows on one side we are capable of incredible detail and complexity when working with extrinsic motivational triggers. We can create impressive segmentation models, audience engagement strategies, and a whole gamut of marketing techniques in order to drive our audiences to engage with our work. But they're all based on extrinsic motivational triggers. And when it comes to working with what we call the heart, our understanding of intrinsic motivation is shockingly simplistic. When we try to move into intrinsic motivation, the temptation is to use aspirational messages of Together we can make a difference, or tell our audiences that they are heroes, or create visually positive images with lots of love hearts and how to love our planet, love each other, which all speak to the inner child. In short, our understanding of heart dynamics is incredibly limited and tends towards naive depictions of how heart-driven communications and intrinsic motivation works. So when we try to venture onto the right side of the motivational continuum, we try to apply the same thinking that works on the left and apply it to the right, often with very limited and mixed results. It is like driving a car with two different types of engine. The engine on the left, which is a fossil-fueled engine, is the engine that we are familiar with. If we are driving a car, when we press the accelerator, we go faster. We put it into reverse, we go backwards. When we steer left, we move left, and it's all very logical. We know how it works. But when we try to intrinsically motivate our audiences, when we apply the same logic as before, things don't seem to work out. When we press the accelerator, the windscreen wipers come on. When we steer left, we go right. When we put the car into reverse, the lights come on. Everything is wired differently. Not in opposites, but using a different logic altogether. Because we don't know how to use this engine, the impacts of this has serious consequences for our work and for the world around us. It is why we remain trapped in a marketing paradigm, on the wrong side of the motivational continuum, and telling the same story again and again, expecting change to somehow magically happen. And as we get more frustrated when this strategy doesn't work, rather than changing the metanarrative, we just double down and try to push harder on the existing metanarrative that we always have been using. The inevitable result is that we move further down the motivation continuum, not up to where we need to be. That is why we can't get to where we need to go. This is why we experience so many problems when we try to create long-term motivation and long-term behaviour change, or reaching out to cold audiences, or overcoming polarisation, and so many other problems we face in our work. It all comes down to this. It is not that we are failing in our work, but rather that we are being failed by the very engine that we thought can take us to where we need to go. It can't. It's not in the nature of the marketing paradigm to bring about positive behaviour change. It does the opposite, in fact. If we are to overcome all the problems with audiences switching off to our messages and low audience engagement, then learning how to use this new engine, which we call the storytelling paradigm, we need to understand how to apply in our day-to-day work. This must become a priority if we are serious about bringing about positive changes on the causes that we care about. This is a storytelling paradigm. It is not a matter of telling stories, but working with the dynamics of purpose-driven storytelling to create a motivational engine to drive our collective work. So just as we have the whole marketing paradigm, a whole multi-billion industry, all based on marketing principles, think of the storytelling paradigm as a whole new ecosystem in and of itself, that has a potential to grow to the same size and weight of the marketing paradigm. So we're not talking about a single technique, but a whole range of different approaches, methodologies, engagement strategies, insights and content, which are all based on the fundamentals of storytelling logic. This storytelling paradigm works when we pull together three core concepts: intrinsic purpose, intrinsic values, and intrinsic motivation, all working in synergy to create a powerful engine in which can drive real change. All three core concepts are needed for the engine to work, and all of these are self-regulating aspects, which means that to work with them we need to know how to work with the unconscious mind. After all, if we look at the values that we are trying to engage our audiences with, protecting the environment, social justice, peace building, these are all intrinsic values. They are self-regulating values. They come from within. So it is logically inconsistent to try to extrinsically motivate intrinsic values. And it is what we've been pretty much trying to do over the last few decades in climate campaigning and activism. Instead, we need to use intrinsic motivation to drive intrinsic values, which are pulled by an intrinsic purpose. And this last component, intrinsic purpose, is one of the most misunderstood aspects of working towards a cause. Often we confuse our cause as our purpose, when actually our cause is our extrinsic purpose. As we can see, extrinsic purpose sits comfortably within the marketing paradigm. Understanding how to work with intrinsic purpose means transcending outdated methodologies such as creating organizational ambitions, or drafting a purpose document, or updating your vision, mission and values documents. Intrinsic purpose works in a very different way, using a different type of logic, a different language that is closely aligned with the logic of the unconscious mind. Understanding intrinsic purpose, what it is, how it works, provides the key for our storytelling paradigm engine to function. Without it, we lose the motivational pull, which is needed if the engine is going to work. So how do we work with the storytelling paradigm? Well, we have to learn how to work with something that we call meta-narrative. Meta-narratives have a profound effect on us, and they have the ability to shape our lives. But because they are implicit by nature, we tend not to notice them, despite the fact that they shape how we relate to the world around us. They also shape our values, beliefs, and actions. Understanding how to work with meta-narratives, what language they use, and also their nature provides a powerful key to help unlock some of the problems we all face. To work with meta-narratives is not storytelling, but rather what we call master storytelling, and working with the implicit nature of storytelling to understand power dynamics in our work and how to create the conditions for intrinsic values to emerge. This all requires a different skill set and toolkit. Now, if this all might sound new or different, abstract or extremely difficult, it's worth reminding ourselves that what we're trying to do here is what our great ancestors have been doing for millennia, and indigenous cultures still do today. They tell stories not to entertain, but to help create the necessary conditions to awaken the necessary values needed for the tribe's survival. And if we analyse these stories, they might seem not that important, childlike even. But their power is that they work on the implicit level, like the meta-narrative, rather than the narrative. The hidden meaning they provide in these ancient stories are more important than the explicit story that is being told. It is no coincidence when we look at indigenous cultures today that they live within their means, they respect their environment, and have very strong values around looking after each other. To put it more technically, they have very high pro-social and pro-environmental values, the very values that we are seeking to engage. And they don't arrive at these values through rules, laws, and other external regulation, nor through positive thinking, or any way we would try to approach these values, but rather through sacred storytelling, rituals, traditional customs, rites of passages, and a whole range of meaning-making activities that provides a canopy of meaning under which they live. We, of course, no longer do this, nor do we think we need to. The danger is that we think we can think our way out of our current crises, when this is clearly not the case. But it is clear that what we are missing, what we have lost, is the lost art of storytelling. And the stories we need to tell are not just positive stories or emotional stories or stories as a means to pass on information, but rather meaningful stories that work with a deep psyche and create the psychological conditions needed to bring about positive change. Or to put it in another way, we need to learn how to become master storytellers, those who understand meta-narratives, how to work with them, how to create powerful meta-narratives that can drive positive change. But to get to where we need to go, we need to look at the importance of interiority in our work. We know exteriority matters, that people sign up, that numbers of actions are counted, that we communicate the right information, that we have the right research, that audience engagement on social media is analysed, that return on investment is clearly met. These are all exterior matters and are important ones, but this does not overshadow or take away the importance of interior matters such as motivation, values, purpose, meaning, meta-narratives and storytelling, all important aspects of creating long-term behaviour change. How we motivate someone to take positive action on the climate emergency, for example, matters just as much as the action itself. In my line of work, there are generally two types of reactions to this point. The first is that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if we extrinsically motivate someone to sign up to our campaigns. It doesn't matter if we use a little bit of fear or create a little bit of anxiety to try to drive positive engagement. It doesn't matter how we do it, just as long as we get our intended results. Just as long as people sign up, show up or pay up, how we do it is of lesser concern. The ends justify the means. It's all for a good cause after all. But this view keeps us stuck in the lower stages of the motivation continuum. It is a view which I regularly encounter, which is completely indifferent to interior matters such as motivation, values, purpose, and cultural conditioning. I think we need to challenge this viewpoint, given where we are, especially on a whole range of issues, including the climate crisis, as well as general issues around motivating audiences into positive action. I would suggest that perhaps it's time to consider an alternative model for our work. If we take interiority seriously, then we will see that motivation matters, and values matter, and purpose matters. These all really matter if we want to bring about real and lasting change. When we look at research into anxiety, especially eco-anxiety, we can see how the Marxian paradigm deteriorates mental health. It dissipates motivation, it creates anxiety, it decreases audiences' agency. These are not abstractions, but all have real-world effects. If we are not motivating audiences using the right motivational triggers, in other words, if we are not on the right-hand side of the motivational continuum, then we will always face this frustrating problem that audiences know what to do, but they are not motivated to do it, or they are unable to motivate others or inspire others to do the same. and everything just slowly deflates or caves in despite the hard work we do to push for positive change. This is why building real political will is really challenging within the marketing paradigm. So it is worth remembering that it is not the case that one engine works while the other doesn't. It is that they both work, but they work differently. One leads to short-term results and is a poor motivator for long-term change. That's the marketing paradigm. While the other leads to long-term results and is a powerful motivator for long-term change, which is the storytelling paradigm. I'll leave it to your discernment as to which one we think we should be using. If you're interested in finding out more or to go on some training on how to become a master storyteller, then we have a professional training program designed exactly for this purpose. Our new Storytelling for a Cause, the Climate Edition, is our full training program which offers ways to shift from a marketing mindset to a storytelling mindset, or rather towards adopting the storytelling paradigm. This is a self-led training course that you can watch all at once or dip in and out of over time. It is about 14 hours long and covers a range of huge subjects that will help you think in a new way, so that we can find solutions to the problems we all face when it comes to motivating audiences into positive change. Although the cause we look at is climate, the themes and insights in this training are universal and can be applied to any type of cause. And I have to say up front that this isn't a training program on how to tell stories, which I'm sure you're already doing, but rather how to think like a storyteller, which is in stark contrast to our marketing mindset, and how to develop a new skill set we call master storytelling. Not to be confused with the ability to master stories, but rather the ability to work with metanarratives and how to work with the unconscious mind, how to work with values and motivational triggers, which are all needed if we want to engage and motivate our audiences into positive action. When we consider some of the major trends from across the different sectors who are working towards positive change, hopefully you will see how this training is not an optional add-on or a niche training designed for communication experts, but rather it provides some fundamental and core insights into human motivation, which I think we all need if we are passionate about working with audiences towards a positive cause. We also offer a series of workshops that cover a range of issues such as values, motivation, paradigms and master storytelling, which are available on our website ministory.co.uk. And if you want to dip your toe in and not commit to training at this stage, then please do check out our Master Storytelling Insights articles found on our website. That they give some insights on how to work with metanarratives, motivational theory, the unconscious mind, plus more. So back to our opening question. Can charities escape the marketing paradigm trap? The answer is, of course, yes, but with a caveat. We can only move on from old paradigms after two conditions are being met. That the old paradigm is no longer fit for purpose, it has fallen apart. And the second is if we have a new paradigm to move to. In our main training program, we have worked extremely hard to be able to show the evidence on how the old paradigm, the marketing paradigm, is falling apart, and it can't take us to where we need to go. But more importantly, as a sane storytelling, you can only replace a bad story with a better story. That is why we have worked hard to create a new story, or rather a new practical engine, which we call the storytelling paradigm, in which to drive our collective work towards positive change in our world. This training includes new toolkits, new methodologies and new ideas which you can implement in your work regardless of what aspect of work you're leading on. Whether it is in communications or in volunteer management, in fundraising, campaigning or in leadership or any other aspect of work, you will benefit from this training. So I hope you found this in some way useful, and I hope that you will in some way or form go on to think about how to tell a new story. Because if there's one thing that our world is desperate for, it's storytellers.